It's time for me to welcome to our cast of stars here on stage, the Chief Economic Advisor, Anantha Nageswaran. Mr. Nageswaran, if you could join us here on stage, please. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for the Chief Economic Advisor, Anantha Nageswaran. Mr. Nageswaran, many thanks for joining us. You know, before I talk to you about the domestic factors, let's talk about the changes that have happened overnight globally. And let me begin by asking you about what you make of the commentary that's come in from the Fed Chief Jerome Powell, stating that perhaps the first signs of a disinflationary environment. How comfortable does that make you feel, especially in light of the global uncertainties that we are faced with? Yeah.
So he, of course, did mention the fact that temporarily, or at least for now, inflation pressures have eased. But he also mentioned that they are very determined to reach their 2% target, and they are committed to further rate increases. But the financial markets took a different view of his press conference. So that is what bothers me, because financial markets, having been conditioned over 2 to 3 decades in a different manner, or are refusing to believe that this Fed would want to see the inflation rate come down even further and would be poised to tighten. So the more they kind of engage in this eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation with the Fed and expects the Fed to blink first, and if the Fed doesn't, then the amount of rate hikes that will be required will become even more than what would be the case otherwise. That is what bothers me from the emerging market and the Indian angle.
And which is why you talked about entrenched inflation and the possibility of a longer tightening cycle as well in the economic survey. But that's one of the global factors. The other global factor that I want you to comment on, and I don't think that we've discussed that enough, especially since we've been poring over the budget, is the impact of what's happening in China. The reopening, bouncing back as far as manufacturing is concerned, the PMI in China coming back to about 50, under that is of course contraction. The implications of China reopening in the way that it has on the global economy, and what it eventually will mean for India as well.
So obviously, given the size of Chinese economy, whatever happens there will have a global impact, whether it's a slowdown or an expansion. And to the extent that if the recovery happens to be smoother, then definitely it would have a it would impart an upward pressure on commodity prices. Including it will create a higher demand for crude oil. So therefore, we have to factor that into our calculations going forward in 23-24. So the speed with which Chinese economy returns to normal and the magnitude of the bounce from last year's growth rates will definitely have a material impact from the point of view of global inflation and from the point of view of commodity prices. So in fact, it could even prolong the monetary tightening cycle in the Western advanced economies. So that is something we need to watch.
Yes, we need to watch that. And so a slowing global growth is in fact advantage to India.
Slowing global growth would be what the doctor would order for India.
Would be what the doctor orders for India. If there are any questions here for the Chief Economic Advisor, do raise your hands and we'll try and get a microphone across to you. But please keep the questions relevant to the CEA. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Anil Advani. There's one particular question that has been bothering me and I've never got a right answer for that. These FIIs that buy stocks in our country in the secondary market results in a lot of forex coming to our country. But none of the FIIs come with the intention of making less than 20-25% return on their investment. When this money comes in, the dollars come in, RBI absorbs these dollars, rupee gets into the market, inflation resulting in inflation, RBI absorbs this rupee by issuing bonds, borrows at about 6 or 7%, and then onward puts these foreign currency in US bonds, which earlier were yielding about 1 to 2%. So this whole benefit of getting FIIs to invest in our secondary market, I somehow have never understood. Has there been any data that how much money has come in by these FIIs in our markets, and what is the current value of that investment? So if let's say $1 billion came in and it is worth about $5 billion, whether the whole exercise was worth it?
So if you look at the data available from RBI and the national NSDL or CSDL, you do get data on the FII flows at cost. But if you want to know what is the value, current market value of these FII flows, then there is a separate table in the SEBI website, assets under custody, that would provide you the market value of the current FII holdings.
Well, you know, that I think is very helpful advice that's come in from the CAA on where to actually source information, where to look for information. But CAA, you know, on the issue of markets, and I want to address this with both you as well as the DPIIT Secretary, and it's been a fairly volatile last 24 to 48 hours as far as the markets are concerned. I want to link this back to you know, your point that you made about the indigestion having been worked out of the system. Bank balance sheets are looking strong at this point in time. Corporate balance sheets are looking strong, and which is why you believe that we are on the cusp of unleashing the animal spirits in the economy. But would you be concerned, and I don't want to draw you into any specifics, but would you be concerned about the kind of exposure that large conglomerates have to the banking sector at this point in time?
Based on the information we have, it doesn't look like at this point it has got the potential to derail the beginning of a new financial cycle.
Okay, so you don't believe that is the case at this point in time? Okay. Outside of you know, the global risks that we spoke of, which of course have to do with interest rates and inflation, and there are many imponderables there on how things will actually pan out given the geopolitical scenario at this point in time. What are the other factors that you're going to be watching for, both in terms of you know, what could move the global markets and then thereby impact India?
So, I mean, as I mentioned in the survey as well, almost 100% of the risks to our scenario for India's growth and inflation in the next financial year, almost all of it come from external factors. One is geopolitics, of course, how the ongoing conflict in Ukraine would pan out, both in terms of its duration and in terms of the intensity, and what kind of impact it could have on both the crude oil price and also on supply chain disruptions. And second is the entire monetary policy tightening cycle and the strength or the weakness of the dollar. All these things would be key determinants of how our, not only our growth and inflation play out, but also on how our external balances evolve in the course of 23-24. So as far as I can see, pretty much at this point, I do see predominantly external factors being able to shape or mar the kind of assumptions we have with respect to our real economy in the next financial year.
I'll come to, yes, we'll get a microphone across to you. If you can stand up, it's easier for them to spot you. Go ahead.
So I had one question. I run a large fintech platform headquartered out of New York. And one thing which is happening right now in US is the Inflation Reduction Act is actually a misnomer. It's for clean energy. You know, US is going to like massive amount of tax incentives coming in, so much so that even the EU is extremely worried. And what's starting to happen, we are seeing that, you know, that we fund a lot of businesses out there, and we are starting to see a lot of European companies even starting to shift their manufacturing over to US right now. And I don't see any like even debate in India around it, that how India is going to compete, you know, in that. And coming to the DPIIT Secretary, what Shireen had asked about the banking privatization. So what the government is doing with fintech platforms like us is that we are launching a lot of the tax credit financing programs right now for businesses who are setting up the units, because it takes time for them to get the tax credits back from the government, and the government wants it to happen, and so that there's no fraud. The problem we have been interacting with Ministry of Finance also has been that because of lack of any legislative reform on the side of banking privatization, none of that can happen in India right now. So that clearly means that we won't be competitive both in manufacturing of clean energy, and we won't have the capital that is required, because the debt capital cost in India is so high today that if we have to compete in the world markets, then we need to have that debt capital also be available.
Sure.
And in US we get it from everywhere. Europeans are coming, you know, you name it, everybody is coming to finance that, right? Because that's a pretty safe kind of investment on the debt side, you know.
Thea, would you like to take that up?
No, I think I'm not really particularly, you know, convinced about, you know, because we have both private banks operating and the public sector banks operating in Indian space. So how is it that the privatization is linked to a particular business of fintech not being done?
GST was brought up here by the DPIIT secretary, and I want to understand what you believe the roadmap could potentially look like. You know, no one's now talking about rate convergence at all at this point in time, even though that was what the aspiration was, that we had too many rates and we should simplify the GST regime. More importantly, as far as the revenue neutral rate is concerned, your predecessor had put forward a revenue neutral rate. We're nowhere close to that at this point in time. What do you believe is the roadmap as far as GST is concerned? Should we just leave it where it is, because you know the government is happy with collections that are coming in at over 1.5 lakh crore rupees for now, so don't spoil the party?
No, the government is aware that there has to be a GST 2.0, but we have to understand that in the last 2-3 years we have had these one-off shocks, which obviously have distorted the speed with which the system becomes familiar with the GST regime. Therefore, we need to allow the system to settle down and become familiar and comfortable, which is what is happening right now, such that the average collection per month is slowly stepping up from 1 lakh crore to 1.4 to 1.5, etc. Whether there has to be only 1 or 2 or 3 rates can be debated ad nauseum. But when you have a country which is in a transition from lower middle income to middle income, etc., the path of GST settling down into a fewer rates than what we have will also take longer than it takes for us to debate this. And yes, the revenue neutral rate has come down, but at the same time, so far, if it leads to higher compliance and better transactions and better tax revenues for the government and greater efficiency, then probably we need to also update our estimate of what the revenue neutral rate is.
Okay. The second question that I had for you was to do with states. And we spoke about capex, central capex, which is at a 19-year high at this point in time, but the government is also incentivizing states to spend and supporting the states as well on that front. In your assessment, especially after the fact that the GST compensation window has closed as far as states are concerned, what is your own assessment of the fiscal health of states at this point in time, and hence their ability to also go forward with the reforms as well as capex spend?
So, based on the revised estimates for 22-23, we do see that states are absorbing about 80% of the interest-free loan that the union government provided for capex in 22-23. And we understand that as of now, the 22-23 state combined fiscal deficit would be probably around 2.4% of their GSDP, which is roughly 1% lower than what was expected. So on the face of it, I think states are doing their bit to consolidate, but we are also aware of the underlying issues of contingent liabilities, of power tariffs, viability of the power generation and discoms, etc. And now some of the states have indicated their intention to move back to the old pension plans, which will show up in their numbers 10 years down the road, etc. So there are underlying issues, but as of now, given the impact and the disturbance that COVID caused, states at the moment are on track to get back to a fiscal sustainability within the short-run parameter, while definitely I acknowledge that there are longer-term issues that need to be addressed.
Let me also take the opportunity to welcome on stage the Economic Affairs Secretary Ajay Seth. Mr. Seth, could we have you join us on stage, please, as we take a question here from Rahul. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for the Economic Affairs Secretary. Go ahead, Rahul.
So I'm saying that what is the tax the economy of our size, economy of our kind should generate versus what's the tax that we actually collect? Is that reasonably converging, or is there a big gap or a small gap? How much is that gap, and what's the trend over the years on that gap?
Okay. If you can give an overall number, what we are collecting as an economy, I'm talking about center and the states put together, is roughly about 17 to 18% of GDP. Is our tax effort. Certainly, it is on a rural size. If you look at just about the BRICS countries, only China has of this order. All other 3 countries have a much higher. And of course, advanced economies have 25% plus. And China is a different, much more controlled economy, or rather is a controlled economy. So we have to move to the path wherein First, from 17-18% we reach to 20% before we think of where we move further. And in the last couple of years, if we discount what happened during the pandemic, inching up like last year, getting 11% plus centers alone, tax to GDP ratio is a positive sign. And more automation, GST and direct tax simplification is moving to that direction. So yes, approach is more ratio, more people into the tax net, a moderate tax rate, that's the general approach.
So given the, please go ahead.
I just wanted to add to what Secretary Economic Affairs said. If you account for the per capita income of India and compare to the kind of tax to GDP ratio that today's advanced economies had at a similar stage of development, then our tax to GDP ratio between center and the states put together of around 18% that he mentioned is quite comparable at a similar stage of development.
Is quite comparable at a similar stage of development. I think, sir, there was somebody else who had a question here. Yes, sir, we'll get the microphone back to you in just a second. Go ahead. It's there, right there. Yeah.
So my question is to DIPAM Secretary first. You did mention about the national monetization pipeline, some things have been done in InBits and other thing. But if we read the notes, you would be falling way short of the target in this year. Now, there are some very easy baits in national monetization pipeline which can be done very easily. So is there any specific target now? You're adding back the target, what you're going to miss here and do an extra this thing in next year? And my another question to Chief Economic Advisor is, we have been talking about that, oh, if the recession is there, it is good for India. My question is a vicious circle. Fed and Bank of England have increased their interest rates today. What happens is the capital flows into the fixed treasury bonds. That's the safest bet to do. Our exports, once the recession is there, goes down. The current account deficit increases. My dollar goes up. Rupee goes up against the dollar.
Yeah.
And it's a vicious circle. So the money flow into India will get hampered. So your growth targets of 6 to 6.8, which your economic survey mentioned, does it get impacted? Have you factored in these geopolitical and the recession in the West?
Let me get the DIPAM Secretary to start, and then I'll get the Chief Economic Advisor as well as the Economic Affairs Secretary to comment. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, and then national monetization plan, yes, I think you're right, there's some sectors which are doing relatively better than some of the other sectors. Because, if you see that if you're able to structure the things well, like for example in the road sector, it is fairly well structured, so therefore you can roll out faster. But in some of the sectors, like for example railways, this kind of models have not really worked yet. I think there were one or two trials, but did not succeed. On the specific case of Ashoka Hotel, I can say the Ministry of Tourism is already working on it, and I think hopefully they should be able to work out a model and bid for it. So I think that's a part of their business plan.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Ashoka is actually moving forward. We don't know when it will finally happen, but perhaps the G20 year may not necessarily be the best time for the government to let go of it. But yes, Economic Advisor on the other question that the gentleman raised.
So, if the advanced economies actually slow down, you are right, first of all, about your comments about the impact on export growth, etc. That is why I mentioned in the survey as well, on balance, which means we take into account both the costs and benefits of slowdown versus continued growth in the developed economies. And on balance, I have concluded that in the current context of where India stands on inflation situation in the world, etc., a slowdown would be more beneficial than a continued expansion in the developed world, because it would have a meaningful impact on oil prices, commodity prices. It would bring them down. Slowdown on balance would be beneficial. But we have taken a range of 6 to 6.8 with a baseline of 6.5. And the fact that the baseline number is not centered between 6 and 6.8 does convey a story to you, which is that in the current global context, we do see that downside risks are more than the upside possibilities to the baseline number.
Put a very specific question to you, because this has been long pending, India's inclusion in the global bond indices. Is there any further movement on that? Because we were given to understand that it was only a matter of time, and in the early part of 2023 we would finally move towards that, and the issues related to tax, etc., had been addressed and sorted out. Is there any clarity on that?
See, at this point of time, coming to the requirement of for the government borrowings, including that of the state government at the current level of projections, our domestic savings can well take care of that.
Okay. Let me then address the issue that has been raised by many overnight on the rural budget side, and there has been a decrease, there has been a decline there, and one could understand that on account of the lower allocation as far as NREGS is concerned. But if you could explain the thinking and the rationale behind what we've seen happen specifically as far as the rural budget is concerned, and why the decline?
It will not be a correct statement to say the rural budget has come down. Of one particular scheme is the MNRE, that allocation has come down, but that scheme is demand driven. People come for a wage employment because they don't have any other employment opportunity. And as we are seeing it, the economy is picking up, especially the services sector. There is a pull factor from urban areas, people migrating back to the urban areas, and they are getting the job opportunities there. But an equally important, what the fiscal is trying to do, for rural housing, budget has gone up from 20,000 crore to close to 55,000 crore, 54,400 and plus crores. So increase of 170%. Who are the people who are going to construct? Machines are not going to construct. Those houses will be constructed by human beings. So there will be a job demand will be coming in. Similar manner for drinking water, rural drinking water, budget has gone up from 60,000 to 70,000. Of course, part of it will be material, but a significant part will as well be material, because that all has to be embedded below the earth. So these two significant increases which generates job or wage employment in the rural area more than compensate for what has been the reduction in terms of NNRGS, but that is based on assessment that demand for wage employment will be less in the coming year. And if it were to be contrary, then obviously through revised estimates, suitable provisions will be made.
The budget has very clearly said that it may not be reliable due to the unprecedented global turbulence and headwinds to put the 24-25 and 25-26 targets as part of the FRBM, and that is what you have stated. So just wanted to understand, because you seem very confident, and yesterday the Finance Secretary also said that we shouldn't have a problem of being able to consolidate 0.7% annually over the next 2 years to get to that number of 4.5%. Why then haven't we placed the glide path in the budget?
It's a question that when we are trying to project beyond a year and over a period of 3-year time, then we have to be sure that assumptions which are making have a reasonable chance of holding on. What we have to look for in terms of the correction, about 2 percentage point over a period of 3 years, whether these are divided in 3 equal slices or they are different. Now we have taken one slice, 0.5%, and that 0.5% is decided based on our assessment that next 1 year public investment has to play a very strong role along with the private sector investment coming in to keep the growth momentum on. That's why a 0.5, not a 0.7. Now next 2 years, whether the second year can take a more than half of that 0.7 or more or less, depend upon how we see the situation evolving and the global headwind subsiding by that time. That's why a firm commitment, once an act is amended, laid down, becomes a difficult one, but very, very clear that come 2025-26, we have to reach below 4.5%.
Let me ask the three of you about the growth magnets, and I'll start by asking you, since that was something that the economic survey mentioned very specifically. You know, of the areas of the priorities that the government is working on, has identified, what do you feel the most confident of in being able to really turn the needle as far as accelerating growth is concerned?
I think the first growth magnet for us will be improved balance sheets, improved the private sector capex cycle will commence, and increasingly third will be the public digital infrastructure contribution to growth, because it is going to address 2 problems that India has been facing historically. One is informality and financial exclusion. Both are being addressed. So all these 3 things are going to be important growth contributors.
Mr. Sheth?
Some of the signs which are seeking not just in terms of the consumption, but we also see in terms of the taxation data which is coming in, even especially in terms of the GST data, and also the gross fixed capital formation, which have been the highest in the first half of the year since 2014-15. These are the signs that economic activity is reviving very strong, and I see that momentum going forward. And when we are talking about growth accelerating, when the adverse external environment is adverse to us, the first goal is to stay closer to 7%, which we are trying to achieve this year. And before, when the global headwinds subside, then think of beyond going 7+.
Okay, yes, and that is the aspiration that hopefully we will be able to do 7% plus. Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Many, many thanks. I know that you have another engagement to get to, so I don't want to hold you back, but thank you very much to the DIPAM Secretary, to the Chief Economic Advisor, as well as to the Economic Affairs Secretary for joining us here on the CNBC-TV18 Budget Verdict. We appreciate your time, and thank you very much for joining us here with your insights. The CNBC-TV18 Budget Verdict, it is now time for the grand finale. Joining us here on the budget verdict stage, we have a power-packed lineup of the budget makers as well as key policy makers. Please join me in welcoming the CEO of the NITI Aayog, Parameswaran Iyer. Ms. Iyer, could we have you join us on stage, please? Also with us, the chairman of the CBDT, Mr. Nitin Gupta. Mr. Gupta, could we have you join us on stage? The chairman of the CBIC, Mr. Vivek Johri, also here with us on the CNBC-TV18 budget verdict. Also with us, the DPIIT Secretary, Mr. Anurag Jain. Mr. Jain, could we have you join us on stage as well? And the MNRE Secretary, Mr. Bhupinder Singh Bhalla. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for joining us here at the CNBC-TV18 budget verdict. Appreciate your time. And thank you for being here with us in the concluding session of the CNBC-TV18 budget verdict. Mr. Iyer, let me start by talking to you, and the microphone is right next to you, sir. You know, when we last spoke, you said that you believe that this is a bottom-up budget. It's a budget that has delivered on the aspirations of every constituency across the country. What, to your mind, has been the biggest force multiplier as far as the budget announcements are concerned?
Well, I think there are a couple of things, Shireen. One, of course, is the huge investment in capex, you know, that huge increase of 10 lakh crores. In addition to that, the continuation for another year of the 50-year interest-free loan to states. So extending that and actually incentivizing the states as well to come in with their own capex and attracting private investment. I think those are going to be key. But then if you know, that's going to have huge positive spin-offs in terms of jobs, employment, etc. But the other part of the budget, which I think is equally important, is the thrust on the social sector. And that's pretty much where NITI Aayog is working with states under the State Support Mission, which was referenced by the Finance Minister yesterday, of taking development right down to the grassroots level. How can states create their own state institutes of transformation like NITI? How can they move from planning to development strategy and really take it down to the block level? And perhaps one of the most significant features of the budget was the focus on inclusion, the particularly vulnerable tribal groups, PVTG. So this new mission which has been announced is actually for the tribal community, the bottom rung of the tribal community, 15,000 crores, 3-year in mission mode to give them, provide basic services. I think that was a very, very significant announcement of inclusion.
Mr. Jain, let me come to you because, you know, as I said, a large thrust on ease of doing business, reducing compliance, as well as encouraging private sector participation across a whole host of industries. I wanted to get your comments and your assessment on where things stand as far as a couple of government schemes are concerned. PLI, various schemes across 13 sectors in various, various forms of rollout at this point in time. Which are the ones that you feel satisfied with, where the progress you feel satisfied with? Where do you believe there is distance to be covered and work is underway to ensure that you push things along? Let me start by asking you about PLI before I get to Gati Shakti.
PLI, as you know, is one of the most important schemes for giving thrust to and creating global champions. The way we look at it, the sectors which we selected were basically based on whether there is a potential for a particular sector to create global champions in the country, whether this particular sector is of a strategic importance to the nation, or whether does it have a very high employment generation potential. So these are the 3 tests on which we actually consider a particular sector. But you'll have to understand the way PLI scheme operates. If in year 1, I give a particular approval to a particular company, it has to make investments.
Yes.
Investment cycle takes time.
So typically in most of the schemes, the investment period granted is 1 year or 2 years, depending on the choice of the company which wants to take the benefit of the PLI. So suppose it takes 1 year benefit. It wants to complete the investment in 1 year. So in the year 2, it will make the investment. Year 3 will be the base year of production.
Okay.
So year 4 will be the claim. So what has happened, some of the news items said that only 15% of the investment has taken place, only 3-4% of the money has been claimed. So let me put it straight. What has happened in most of these schemes, the investment is supposed to be completed over a period of 4 to 5 years. Say typically in a scheme, I say 15% of investment is the benchmark for year 1, 35% is year 2, 65% is year 3, 100% is year 4. So at the end of first year, how much would be the investment? 15%. If you put 15 in the denominator, it will be 100% performance. And if you put 100 in the denominator, it will be a 15% performance. So in the first year, the actual performance, if you put in the denominator, the target for the first year, it was 106%.
Okay.
Okay. Similarly, on the claims. So the schemes have actually started in different periods of time.
Yes.
So this year, we expect by March that out of 14 schemes, 7 would have got their first claims, especially which were the early birds would make larger claims. So most of the schemes are, by and large, there are certain minor hiccups which are there in implementation of any scheme. So concerned departments are continuously hand-holding all these investors, and I hope that, I mean, the way CEO NITI and we normally coordinate and review at our level, and then there's an empowered committee which is chaired by the cabinet secretary, that also reviews. Invariably, it's only minor hiccups, no major hiccups.
Ms. Iyer, let me get you to comment on that as well. Minor hiccups, no major hiccups. And thank you again, Mr. Jain, for explaining how the PLI scheme, the incentives and the claims work, because often that's not understood. And he's absolutely right in pointing out that there have been different rollout timelines across different schemes. We started with pharmaceuticals, and of course that was the very first PLI scheme to be rolled out. And then of course there was the COVID uncertainty as well. But in your assessment, what has been the biggest factors that are working as far as these 14 schemes are concerned?
I think first of all, Shireen, like Anurag said, I think the first factor is the selection of these 14 sectors. That itself has been very significant. And then of course, it's the industries coming forward, the very close monitoring, and I think the hand-holding and the facilitation for the industries, coordination with the state governments, getting the land acquisition, the electricity, the water up and running, and we do a very close monitoring. And so already about 800 crores, 800 worth of incentives have already been approved. We expect 3,000 to 4,000 crores before the end of March. And of course, the earlier sectors, pharma, mobiles, they're moving quicker. And I think others are learning from that process. So it's well underway, and we're very optimistic about how this program is going to transfer made in India and manufacturing in strategic sectors in India.
You know, one of the...
Sir, may I just add
please, sir.
2 things. Sir, what happens is the simplicity of the scheme is very important. The claim is dependent only on the production and nothing else. So that is very easy to verify with the GST, tax registrations, etc. So there are no administrative complexities involved in passing the claims. That is one of the biggest and important factors to my mind.
And you're absolutely right. That is a big factor, and certainly a big factor as far as industry is concerned. But Mr. Bhalla, let me come to you. One of the areas identified as a priority area has been the energy transition. This has been a budget that has identified the green focus, and an allocation of 35,000 crores, if my memory serves me right, has been made for the energy transition to OMCs, etc. You know, I want to understand from you, there's been a significant distance that's already been covered, especially when we talk about renewable energy. How confident are you feeling at this point in time as the world also makes this shift about India's own goals and aspirations?
Yeah, as you know, India has set a target of meeting 50% of its installed capacity, electricity installed capacity by non-fossil fuels by 2030. We have, right now we are at around 42%. of the installed capacity, of the current installed capacity. Of course, looking at what our target is of how the energy would grow, we expect that we will need to add about 200 gigawatts or something of that sort of renewable capacity in the next 7 years. So it will be a spread of solar, wind, hydel, and bioenergy, and so on and so forth. Our expectation is, and what we are moving very confidently towards is, over the next 7 years, we will achieve 500 gigawatt. In fact, while we have committed, internationally committed to install 50% of our installed capacity from non-fossil, but Prime Minister has set a target of 500 gigawatt. So that's what we are aiming at, and we are very confident of achieving it.
What is the constraint or the challenge that you believe you're faced with in being able to get to that target? Mr. Gadkari was here and he said, capital for me is not a problem. I have enough and more of it. How much of a factor is capital, and what are some of the other constraints that could get in the way of you being able to get to the 500 gigawatt target?
See, if you do the numbers, I mean, we have estimated that we will need about 23 lakh crore of investment in renewables for the next 7 years to reach the target. And of course, part of it would come from equity, part of it would come from, the balance would come from a combination of debt instruments as well as bond market. Equity, we are very confident that the private sector would be able to achieve. As you know, we are actually, the expansion of renewable capacity in the country has been spearheaded by the private sector. And the systems have been set are so robust, and there's so much of excitement when the new bids are invited, that I think there's no dearth of investments. In fact, a lot of international investment funding is coming in into the sector. So there will be, of course, financing will be one of the criteria, one of the factors which would lead us to reach it, but it would not be a constraint as far as we are concerned. Second is, whether do we have the capacity to produce enough solar and wind equipment in the country. As you know, you've seen the last year what supply chain issues we faced, the prices which rocketed, not only in other sectors but also in renewables. But with, as Anurag just mentioned, the PLI scheme, for example, for solar, we have already done PLI 1, which we've already awarded it integrated capacity of about 8.7 gigawatt of from polysilicon to solar module is what was awarded in PLI 1. As was mentioned, our capacity, in fact, I reviewed it today with the companies who were awarded, and it's absolutely on track. And with December 24, which is the 3-year timeline for our PLI, in fact, before that, we will have a fully integrated capacity of polysilicon to module produced in India as far as solar is concerned. And PLI 2 is now, we've called for bids. The bids are about to close, and that will add a significant capacity to our solar manufacturing in India. In fact, looking at the numbers and looking at how these companies are actually adding capacity over and above what they have actually won, or whatever they plan to, bid for in the PLI 2, they are setting up very high giga capacity factories. We will be producing enough solar manufacturing in India after about 3 years. It takes about 3 years for it to roll out. By year 2026, we are expecting that we will be producing enough solar manufacturing in India to not only cater to our requirement, but also to export.
Iyer, you were both in Davos trying to talk to investors about the potential of the India growth story. And let me start by asking you, Mr. Jain, in light of all of the measures that have been taken, what was the feedback that you got about India's competitiveness, specifically from a manufacturing standpoint? Is there anything more tangible, specific steps that investors have put on the table that the government is working on?
I think this will be a pretty longish answer if you can, but...
Is that a long list of demands that have been made?
No demands, the kind of work which has been done. So first and foremost, I would say the kind of structural reforms which have happened. the policy governance reforms which have happened, add on that the rule of law which we have in our country, add on to that demographic dividend, add on to that the best part, talented youth of the country. So this is what is going to drive the India's growth for next 25-30 years. The startup story we all know. So all this growth will be driven by, to our mind, knowledge, innovation and sustainability. And our startup ecosystem is doing fantastically well on all these. They are providing frugal and innovative solutions to all these problems. So if you are solving a problem for India's scale, you are actually solving global problems. Next 4 billion people in the world, they are looking to those solutions. Like India's public digital infrastructure. That's marvelous. I don't need to get into this. That is something which is absolutely unique. Nowhere else in the world you have something similar. We have based all our systems on presence-less, cashless, paperless kind of systems. Plus, it is based on open source, open platforms, open network. So what happens, any new startup or any new person who wants to start his business, he can plug into this existing ecosystem. Rest of the ecosystem is provided by the existing system. So therefore, the entry barriers have been lowered substantially, and that is what is fueling the growth. So this is one aspect. The kind of solutions, when you are talking to Secretary MNRE, next important thing which is going to happen. There are companies in India which started as a startup. Now they have really grown big, unicorns. The cost of 24/7 energy based on renewable energy, can you guess? 6 cents.
Wow.
This will excite the whole world. They have come out with designs. They are taking the renewable energy, solar, wind, everything, and using the pump storage with their improved efficiency design, which gives 81% efficiency. And they are giving firm power for 24/7. The real problem with renewable energy is this, that it is available only at certain time of the day. So they are spreading the risk by putting the solar and wind both. Wind comes in generally in the night, solar comes generally in the day, plus the storage. So even it out. So these are kind of solutions which are coming. You talk of anything, what India's startup ecosystem or young entrepreneurs are doing, it is pretty exciting. So it is a technological revolution which is happening in India. So most of the people are looking towards India as the real next place to invest in. I mean, you would have heard the stories from IMF that as the brightest. So all those things are happening. So most of the people were excited in Davos. They were looking up to India to invest. And when we asked, there are very, very minor issues like FDI policy. India is one of the most open economies. The list where you cannot invest is not there, where you need government permission or you cannot invest 100%. That is just less than a page. So I can tell you with confidence that India's FDI policy is one of the most open FDI policies.
You know, you spoke a lot about startups, sir, and this is a subject close to my heart. I've been tracking it for 22 years now. So one of the big asks from the startup ecosystem is this business of linking the certification by the DPIIT that clears you to actually be qualified as a startup and then avail of the kind of benefits that the government is willing to put on the table. That process is taking very long. There are very few certified startups. When can we see that change?
That we have tried to improve the process. Earlier there was one committee which was taking it. So till about 3 months back, there are 2 major advantages which they are looking for. There are 3 levels of certification. First level of certification is that you just file and it's automatical, you get it automatically. So there are about 88,000 startups which have been registered. So there's no problem in that. Second registration is for angel tax, 56(2). There was some news items today that that has been done away. People are nervous about it.
No, it's just been parity. The non-residents have been brought.
No. The problem came from somewhere. So therefore, I would like to make that clear also on this count, that there is no change as far as startups are concerned. Anyone which has got a recognition of DPIIT for investing into that particular startup, the exemption under 56(2) continues.
Correct.
So that is there. So under that, more than 7,000 have got registered. There's absolutely no issue for 56(2). So first registration, which gives you benefits like GEM, startup, exemption from experience, net worth, turnover, criteria for participating in government tenders, that's available to everybody. This 7,000, I'm sure there is absolutely no hiccup. When you apply, you get it automatically. So it is only that the rest of the people have not gone to that stage where they want angel investors to come in or whatever. The last one, which was for 80 IAC. So by very nature also, 80 IAC is something which not many people apply because they have to grow big before they apply. But still our process was slow, and that was a complaint. Against about 2,500 applications, only 400 odd had been cleared. So what we did, we have now created 10 parallel boards to improve the speed. So in the matter of last 2 months, the approvals have gone up from 400 odd to about 1,200. And hopefully by March or April, we would finish the 100% pendency because we have multiplied our force by 10 times.
10 times, well.
And by taking the benefit of the experts in the ecosystem. So we have divided the work into 2 parts. One, people who look at the innovation part, one who look at the genuineness of the company. Both the inputs come, our committee automatically approves it.
Well, that's good news, and that certainly is going to be a relief to many who are waiting for that clearance. But Mr. Iyer, you know, the sectors that you believe at this point in time are poised to be able to attract foreign capital specifically. Of course, the hope is domestic capital will start to flow in as well. But really, from a manufacturing standpoint, in the conversations that you had, where do you believe we're likely to be able to draw in the investment?
Well, Shireen, as I think Anurag has stolen most of my thunder on Davos. He's already said whatever needs to be said. But in the many private conversations which I had and all of us had, there's huge excitement about investing in India. And, you know, the sectors are the sunrise sectors, but in particular in the digital space, in green energy, there's huge enthusiasm. And I think for a couple of reasons. One is India's credibility in terms of delivering large projects at scale on time. So I think this government has got a phenomenal track record of delivery on the ground. And whether you look at infrastructure, you look at the 70,000 kilometers of road, the numbers are very big. And that was hugely impressive for many people who hadn't really understood the delivery at scale. 400 million bank accounts. You look at 2 billion vaccinations. And the ability to do this with quality and on time, I think that was very, very impressive, and that resonates. But the sectors are the usual. In addition to that, on the energy front, you know, our record in terms of our NDCs, we are actually walking the talk on our climate commitments, unlike many other countries in the world. And I remember that discussion you moderated on looking at the whole, moving from looking at the adaptation.
Mitigation to adaptation,
Exactly, mitigation to adaptation, which was put on the table at Sharm el-Sheikh. So again, on that front as well, I think there's a lot of confidence that, particularly now with India hosting the G20 presidency, the importance of putting these issues on the table, the ability for India to lead the global south, these were all issues which really resonated. In particular, what really excited them was the sort of alternate climate agenda put forward by the Prime Minister on lifestyle for the environment, of how India can lead the world in walking the talk on climate.
Mr. Jain, you know, the expectation was that we would hear from the Finance Minister about the progress of the Gati Shakti program in the budget, but that wasn't the case. So let me address that issue with you on where things currently stand as far as the Gati Shakti plan is concerned, what you've been able to do in terms of speeding out infrastructure development, cost savings, time savings as well.
I think the budget was Gati Shakti budget. What is PM Gati Shakti? PM Gati Shakti is basically improving the infrastructure for logistic efficiency. So allocation going up to 10 lakh crore. I mean, sir has already spoken, so I'll not repeat all that. So that is what is the focus on infrastructure. What is PM Gati Shakti? PM Gati Shakti is way of operationalizing your schemes in a manner which is whole of government approach, sharing of data using technology, designing, I mean it's planning and decision making being much faster, much better in quality. That is what is PM Gati Shakti. So what we have done on PM Gati Shakti platform, we have 1600 GIS layers, which have all kinds of things. You have a 3D visibility of the earth, you have visibility of existing infrastructure, the road, rail, the water canals, the gas pipelines, the telecom lines, etc., whatever infrastructure. You have layers for forest, the mining leases which have been granted. You have GIS layers for the geological wealth which is underneath. So while you are planning your alignments for the infrastructure, you can make an optimized decision making. Like there have been examples where by realigning the project, the need for an forest clearance has been done away. So your project gets advanced by about 1 to 2 years. That's one part. Second important part in PM Gati Shakti framework is that we are putting the revenue layers also. All the states have been requested, about 12 states have already done it. Rest of the states are process of putting their revenue maps. So where the revenue maps are available. Say for example, I'll quote one. The road from Pune to Bangalore was being planned. So it passes through 30 different tehsils. So 30 tehsils means to create a land acquisition case, you have to go to different 30 tehsils if you go work the traditional way. Each case has to be made village-wise, so you finalize your alignment, you put on the map, find out who is the owner, and then come out. So it typically takes about 6 months to 1 year just to prepare the land acquisition case. Now, because the revenue maps are superimposed, actually it is a matter of hours that the output comes out. The case is prepared village-wise, name of the person, how much land, how much price it would, cost it would be for land acquisition, and the officer has to just sign it. So you gain in the DPR formulation instead of 6 months to 1 year, it comes out in 2 months, 3 months. In case of land acquisition, instead of 6 months to 1 year, it comes out in matter of hours. So you are expediting, and the decision making is better. As I explained, you can avoid clearances.
Mr. Gupta, Mr. Iyer, Mr. Jain, Mr. Jory and Mr. Bhalla, what an absolute pleasure it has been. Thank you very, very much for joining us here on the Budget Verdict. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for our guests here who've joined us to explain the priorities and the roadmap for the government going forward.